Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Essay. Today we are gonna see what if Issei was born with two incredible powers. The short fic. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Pain like he had never felt before, an unimaginable pain in his abdomen. He felt as if he was being burned from the inside out, but not by flames. It was speeding from its epicenter in his stomach and reaching to every part of his body. Nothing he did seemed to relieve it, only making it worse. Above him stood the treacherous bitch that had done it to him. Yuma Amano, an angel with black wings in an S&M outfit. It infuriated him, but also terrified him. He didn't know what to do, he was going to die. He knew that much, but he couldn't bring himself to accept it. He couldn't allow Amano to get away without vengeance. The more he thought about it, the greater his ire became. It soon reached a point, and the pain fled from his mind. Standing, he charged at the angel, who had been gleefully watching him suffer. But he was quickly knocked down. Ha! You think you have any chance against me? A fallen angel. You're nothing but a pathetic human, Issei-kun. Even with a sacred gear. She laughed maniacally. Coughing up blood, Issei tried his best to stay upright. Sacred gear? Why would I have one? I don't even know what that is. You don't need to know. But hear this. The only one to blame is the god that gave it to you. Blame him. With that, Rainer gathered a massive ball of light and tossed it at Issei's now prone form, disintegrating him immediately. Issei Hyoudou was gone, nothing but ashes in his place. Unknown location. Blinding white light shining into his eyes brought Issei out of his slumber. As he opened his eyes he saw endless white and the two figures standing in it. One was a giant red Welsh dragon with green eyes. The second figure was a transparent old man, with long silver hair and a beard. The man wore white robes and simple sandals. Despite his apparent age, he held an aura of authority. "Ugh, where am I? I feel like I got hit by a bus," were the first words out of the boy's lips. It was the man who answered. "You have every right to feel like that, it's not every day your body is destroyed and you survive. Honestly, it only happened due to your special circumstance. As for your question. The best way to describe this place is as your soul. So it wasn't all a dream then, I really got stabbed by that. That thing." Issei spat the words with disgust. "Unfortunately so. But there is an upside. While you were asleep we created a new body for you, you'll notice some changes at first, but you'll get used to them," was the man's soft reply. Shaking his head, Issei moved on. "So, who exactly are you two?" A deep chuckling came from the dragon's direction, and then it spoke. "I am the Red Dragon Emperor, Drage. I am the one who is sealed in your left arm as a sacred gear. The old man is Sanctus, the deceased biblical god." Issei was at a complete loss for words. Never had he imagined that God was dead, nor that he would meet him. For a few moments there was silence, and Issei regained his bearings. "So what are you here for? I don't really understand." Sanctus took over once again. "We are here for two separate reasons. Drage because he is sealed within the boosted gear on your right arm and he wishes for his partner to survive first contact with a mere fallen. I am here because you are here. I am but a mere shadow of my former self, a residue left on the soul we share. You see, you are me reincarnated as a human. God cannot die permanently, so each time one dies a new one is chosen. Given the same power, but no control over it and a shadow of the former to guide them." Again Issei could not form coherent words and failed to speak. So Sanctus continued. "The majority of your power will be sealed until you can control the fraction you have been given completely. Then the next fraction will be awarded and the cycle continues until you have all your power returned. This applies only to raw power however, your abilities are all waiting to be used once you have some control. And the system I created in heaven will work at full capacity as soon as you return to it and take control. Being God has no real obligations beyond powering the system and helping resolve any major conflicts the humans have. You'll notice that the greatest wars have all been fought during God's absence." Still no words were coming from Issei, and it was beginning to worry Sanctus, but he continued. "Finally you will take on the memories and knowledge of all previous gods, there have only been 3, so that you can maintain your image. No one but Michael knows there has been more than one god, so he will help you as well. Any questions?" Finally Issei snapped out of his stupor and replied. "Only 2. How can I contact you two again? And, can I go home now?" Laughing at Issei, Sanctus replied. "Just concentrate on your left hand being filled with power, then about us. You'll see. And yes, you can go home. You've had a very long day. We'll talk more tomorrow." But those words everything flashed brightly then disappeared. Issei drifted off into unconsciousness. Issei woke to something squishy under his head. It was probably the comfiest pillows he had ever felt. But something was off about it. It was warm and was moving up and down, almost as if it was breathing. Wait. It was breathing. It wasn't a pillow, it was a woman's chest. Slowly opening his eyes, Issei rose up only to find himself in a rather compromising position. He was naked in bed with a beautiful woman, a woman named Ria's Gremory. Shaking himself out of his shock, Issei looked around. He was in a large room with a giant four-poster bed along the wall. The furniture was all elegant and had an old feel to it. Looking out a window, Issei could see Kuo Academy. That meant this was probably the old school building. But why was he here and why couldn't he remember anything that had happened? Concentrating, Issei struggled to recollect the past few hours. Slowly the fog lifted and it all hit him. He was killed but was saved by Drage and Sanctus. Looking down at his new body, Issei could easily spot the differences. Where before his body was slightly athletic, now it was fully chiseled and finely tuned. He could also see his skin was much more pale. But that was beside the point. Right now he needed to figure out why he was here. He obviously was still a virgin, he would have remembered that. So why was he in bed with Ria's? What was her connection to all this? Then he realized something. His usual perverseness was gone, and while he's still excited about seeing a naked woman, he wasn't totally freaking out. He was acting much more like a normal person. But he quickly dismissed it as a side effect of last night's events. Throwing the covers off himself and Ria's, Issei studied the prone form beneath him. She truly was a beautiful woman. With natural crimson hair, pale skin, bluish-green eyes, large but firm breasts, a perfect ass and killer hips. She was the image of beauty. From that chain of thought, Issei decided to speak to Sanctus before waking the girl. Concentrating on filling his left hand with power, he noticed a glow around his arm. Out of nowhere a crimson gauntlet appeared on his hand, then it expanded twice. When it finished it covered his entire left arm from the shoulder down. Green jewels were embedded on top of the hand, on the forearm and on the shoulder. The fingers were like draconian claws, sharper than razors and harder than steel. In his head he could hear both Drage and Sanctus having a quiet conversation. "Good morning, Drage, Sanctus. Morning, partner, sleep well." Drage chuckled at his implied meaning. "Very well, actually. Thanks for asking." "Good morning, Issei, I'm glad you're feeling well," spoke Sanctus politely. "Yes, well, I just wanted to thank both of you. We hardly know each other and you've done so much to help me. Anyway, I have to get moving, things won't do themselves." With that he abruptly broke the mental connection and returned to reality. Beside him Ria's was beginning to stir and that meant he should probably wake her. So he shook her gently by the shoulder. Soon she opened her eye and looked up surprised at Issei. "You look different." Issei smiled slightly. "I'll take that as a compliment." It was. "So, not that I mind or anything, but why are we in your bed naked? I'm sure we didn't have any fun last night." Grimacing slightly, Ria spoke somberly. "It a bit complicated, but last night I found you half dead and I was trying to heal you. By sleeping in the nude and channeling you my power." Chuckling slightly at her loss for words, Issei relieved her worry. "Don't worry, I know all about the supernatural, so don't worry. And thanks for helping me, most people would have walked on past." Blushing slightly, Ria stuttered a reply. Thank you. Anyway, what faction are you from? And who are you really?" At that Ria's blush disappeared and a smirk formed on her face. "I am Ria's Gremory, heiress of the Gremory clan and a high-class devil." "Devil, huh? Oh well, makes no difference to me. You seem to be nice enough. So tell me, what is someone like you doing here on Earth? I'd have thought you'd be in the underworld." So began a long string of conversation covering all topics imaginable, from school to politics to personal affairs. Both seemed to naturally trust the other and simply opened up and spilled the secrets only a select few others knew of. Being completely naked and practically in each other's arms not fazing them at all. 1 week had passed since Issei had woken up in Ria's bed and in that time much had happened. He had spent much of that first day speaking to Ria's, never really leaving her bed or putting on any clothing. For some unexplainable reason it just felt right. During their long talk, Issei had breached her well-placed defenses and gotten to know the real Ria's, even getting her to talk about some of the things that seemed to trouble her. Though he had been unable to figure out what the biggest cause of her apparent distress was, as she refused to speak about it, but he decided to leave it alone. If she wanted him to know, she would tell him. They also spoke about the extreme calm they felt around one another, which both had definitely noticed. No matter the effort put into finding an answer, they could come up with none. So they put the matter to rest, saying that it could be figured out later. The second day was spent introducing Issei to Ria's peerage and eventually Sona's peerage as well. Issei found that he very much liked everyone in both groups, but was more at ease with the occult research club than the student council. Hyoudou seemed to be a good man, but carried a burden that no one else understood. Kaneko Taoju was quiet but kind and radiated an aura unlike the others, one his godly knowledge said belonged to a Nekomata. Finally was Akeno Himejima. While she appeared to be a perfect woman, she was in fact the ultimate sadist and held a dark past. Issei felt a weak corrupted connection with her. His godly knowledge told him she was half fallen, the daughter of Barakiel and a human woman. After meeting them, Rias went with Issei to speak with his parents about his absence the past 2 days. With a bit of hypnotism and some clever excuses, Issei was kept out of trouble and given the all-clear to stay out with the occult research club in the future. The rest of the week passed as normal, with the exception of Issei starting a new reputation as a smarter, non-perverted man and hanging out in the old school building with the OCR. It was currently Saturday morning, and Issei had told Riaz that he would be unavailable today and possibly the next. The day was the day he planned to meet with Michael and retake control of his system. After digging into his godly knowledge, Issei found that he could summon any of the angels at will. He could also raise up fallen, resurrect the dead as angels, and change any of the rules that govern the angels' actions. But he could only accomplish this, except summoning, after taking control of the system. Taking a deep breath, Issei concentrated on bringing the Archangel Michael to him. A moment later a bright white magic circle appeared on the ground before him and a man with 12 golden wings, a halo and white robes, rose out of the light. The man had a look of shock written on every corner of his face, he obviously hadn't expected to be summoned. Then as he saw Issei and the unmistakable aura that only he could recognize, his face contorted into an expression of immense joy and a bit of worship. "My lord. I'm overjoyed to see this day come. It's been years since you disappeared, I was worried you might not be coming back." Smiling at Michael's reaction, Issei spoke to the angel. "Please Michael, when we're alone call me Issei. I'm still getting used to this whole being God thing. Honestly it's a bit disorienting." Already taking a liking to the new god's personality, Michael responded positively. "Of course, Issei. I trust you've spoken to Sanctus then, you seem to understand most of what's happening, so this isn't on accident." "Yes I have, quite a story about that actually. But I'll tell you later. Now, before we go to the system I have something you should know as my closest confidant." Issei switched to a more serious tone. Michael's reaction was imminent, he went from joyous to serious in less than a second. "What is it, my lord?" Raising an eyebrow, Issei continued without correcting the Archangel. "Due to my previously having human blood and not having awakened my powers until recently, I was born with a sacred gear." Slightly widening his eyes, Michael leaned in. "Which one, sire?" Rolling his eyes at the title, Issei answered. "The boosted gear, the Longinus that contains Drage." That shut any responses Michael could have provided down, he couldn't quite wrap his head around it. God wielding a Longinus gear. It was unthinkable, a god who used a god-killing weapon. Had it come out of any other's mouth he might have laughed. Chuckling, Issei ended the awkward silence. "Ironic isn't it?" All Michael could do was nod his head. "Well, let's go to the system. Shall we?" In a bright flash of white light, they disappeared. Unknown location in heaven. In a golden room that overlooked all of heaven, stood Issei Hyoudou. Before him was a sphere covered with numerous runic patterns and impossibly complex glyphs. The sphere itself was made of pure red diamond, while the grooves that marked the runes and glyphs coursed with golden liquid. Altogether it was a truly beautiful piece, one that seemed to pulse like a heart. Lifting his hands to the sphere, Issei focused on reaching out with his power and latching onto the sphere. This sphere was the core of God's system and the best conduit for power in existence. As his power attached to the system, Michael's was released and a visible pulse of energy rushed from the core and out into the world. The pulse traveled the length of heaven, onto the earth and beyond. When it ended Issei felt a rush of euphoria that marked his true ascension as the biblical god. As the system recharged and once again reached its peak performance levels, Issei could feel the holy energies flowing throughout the world. He could hear the prayers offered him, he could see every sacrament completed and feel the very faith that so many held. "I feel. Complete. The system is back up and running, balance has returned, and I have claimed my seat as God. Wonderful, now back to my life in Kuo." An ear-splitting grin marred Issei's features. "But sir, why go back there? You've just returned and the people will want to hear from you. They've been pleading to hear from you since your disappearance. Only the upper echelons of the three factions knew of your death, everyone else thought you to be alive and simply shunning the world at large." Michael was visibly upset. "I want to keep my identity secret for a while longer. And I'd like to spend a bit more time with my friends in Kuo before they realize who I am. But don't worry, I suspect I won't have a choice but to reveal myself in the near future." Despite the topic, Issei still sported a goofy smile. "Very well, my lord. You know best, after all." Michael brightened after hearing Issei's honest words. "No, thank you Michael. Without you things would have been a disaster in my absence. I owe you a debt, one I will pay in full someday." With those words, Issei flashed out of the room. Park area of Kuo. Issei was on his way home, having decided to take a walk after leaving heaven. He was minding his own business for the most part, but was unconsciously listening to the prayers of those around him. Part of being God I guess, Issei thought to himself. Most people had wishes for their children or other family members, and others had great ambitions. Almost everyone had selfish desires and wants that served only themselves. But a few genuinely prayed for the benefit of others, complete strangers and people on the other side of the planet. Unfortunately, those people were few and far between. As he walked through the serene park and listened to the prayers, Issei felt a pulsing sensation from his boosted gear and his chest, where his connection to the system was centered. At first the feeling was light, and he thought he imagined it. But the further he went the stronger it got, until it almost ached. Annoyed with the pulsing, Issei brought forth his divine knowledge and sought an answer. He found it quickly, a powerful sacred gear wielder was near. It wasn't battle-oriented however, and wouldn't cause any harm, so he put it out of mind. He continued walking, ignoring the sensation. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a young nun drop to the ground. At the same time he felt a strong prayer exit her mind. Looking at the young woman, Issei saw she was about his age and was very beautiful. She had light blonde hair, milky white skin, emerald green eyes, a dazzling smile despite her position and a cute nun outfit. What caught his attention however, was the extreme aura of faith this girl emitted. It was more potent than any seen on Earth in millennia. That aura seemed only enhanced by the powerful sacred gear she wore. Snapping out of his slight daze, he offered the girl a hand. "Are you alright? You took a pretty hard fall." Taking his hand, the girl answered. "Yes, thank you. My name is Asia Argento, it's nice to meet you." Smiling softly, Issei replied. "My name is Issei Hyoudou, and it is a pleasure to meet you, Asia. Are you part of the church?" Blushing slightly, Asia stuttered out an answer. "Yes, I was assigned to the church in this town." That set warning bells off in Issei's mind, warnings only reinforced by the prayers he could sense from her. She was praying, both consciously and not, for God to forgive her and to take her back into the church, away from the Grigori. That invoked an atrocious feeling deep within him. How could one with so much faith be cast out from the church? How could one so pure be ostracized so? What would cause such an unholy act to be sanctioned? Whatever it was, Issei would not let it stand. His inner God would not let him. Looking back at Asia, Issei saw that she had lowered her head, either in embarrassment or shame. "Asia, how would you like a tour of the town? You look a bit lost." Lifting her head up, Asia looked up at Issei with begging eyes. Eyes that craved friendship, eyes that spoke of sadness. "I'd love one. Thank you so much." Out of nowhere, Asia's stomach growled deeply. Asia blushed to the roots of her hair and lowered her head again in embarrassment. Smiling at Asia, Issei spoke. "But first, lunch." Asia looked back up with those same pleading eyes. "It's okay, I'm not that hungry." As if to contradict her, Asia's stomach growled even louder. Issei smirked in amusement. "Lunch it is." Taking Asia's things in one hand and her own hand in the other, Issei began toward the nearest burger joint. "So, Asia, where are you from?" "Originally, I'm from Italy. But I've spent time in several countries." She smiled faintly, nostalgia claiming her. Staying silent, Issei wondered how he was going to handle the situation. What could he do for her? What would benefit her most? But his train of thought was brought to a screeching halt when he heard a cry of pain. Jerking his head over, he spotted a young boy who had scraped his knee, crying. He also saw Asia's worried expression. She truly cared for the well-being of others, even strangers. Before Asia could move on her own, Issei led her over to the boy. Switching back to Japanese, he spoke softly to the boy. "It's okay buddy, we're going to patch you up." Placing his hand over the wound, he channeled benevolent energy into it. With a faint white glow, the wound was healed. Removing his hand, he patted the boy on the head and grabbed hold of the stunned Asia. Not bothering to placate the worried mother that had rushed over, Issei walked away as if nothing had happened. They were almost half a mile away before Asia spoke again. "You have a sacred gear?" Grinning slightly, Issei answered. "Yes, I do. But that wasn't its power, rather, it was benevolent energy. Much like that of your own gear, Twilight Healing." During the silent period, Issei realized he could learn her gear's identity. Issei tapped into God's knowledge and learned to see the gears hidden with people. Eek. Asia was terrified that she would be rejected because of her abilities, it was a fear carved into her very being. Stopping and turning to face Asia, Issei squeezed her hand in a comforting manner. "Don't freak out. I'm not going to turn on you because of your power. I'm the last person who would even think to do so." That alleviated her worry, all she wanted was to be accepted. But it also piqued her interest. "How did you even know I had a gear?" Frowning at the question, Issei thought on what he wanted to say. After a moment he spoke. "I have the unique ability to see who has gears and what they are. Tell me, after all you've been through, do you still have faith in God?" Looking almost offended at the question, Asia answered testily. "Of course I do. No matter what, I believe in him." Issei's face brightened greatly at that, his chances were looking better already. "If he asked you to come back to the church, would you? Would you forgive him for not being there for you, for failing you?" Now Asia was visibly upset, she clearly didn't like this line of questioning. "Of course I'd go back. I'd do anything God asked of me." Issei was jovial, he would be able to help this girl. This girl with such wonderful potential and overwhelming faith. Then, Asia Argento, would you like to leave the Grigori and come back to the church with me? You never should have been excommunicated in the first place. Upon hearing those words, Asia broke into tears. This was the day she had prayed for since she was branded a heretic. The day that God forgave her and allowed her return to his church. Of course I'll come. She began sobbing again, all the questions about who and what Issei was fading from her mind. Picking up Asia, Issei teleported to his home. All plans of lunch out and a tour of the town forgotten, instead replaced by the need for a home-cooked meal and a warm bed for two. Issei awoke with his face in a familiar position, but it was slightly unlike he remembered it. While last time they had been large, soft and firm, this time they were modestly sized, still soft, and a little bit squishy but not saggy. Opening his eyes, he saw blonde locks, rather than the crimson ones he was so used to. The morning daze leaving him quickly, he recalled the event of the previous evening. After being Asia home, his mother had cooked them a nice meal, and Asia had eaten as if she had tea on days. After the meal was over, Issei took Asia up to his room. He offered her the bed and claimed the floor for himself. Of course she didn't like that, instead dragging Issei off the floor and onto the bed to sleep next to her. It seemed the young girl had grown quite attached to Issei in the short time they knew each other. Somehow, the pair had ended up in a compromising position through the course of the night. Not that Issei minded, in fact he enjoyed it. Despite losing the brunt of his perverseness, he still had a healthy appreciation for the female form. Rising slowly, as not to disturb Asia, Issei changed into some sweats and defended the stairs. He was intent on finding himself a good fast. About half an hour later, Asia found her way into the kitchen as well. She was stumbling slightly and looked as if she had just survived a tornado, but still beautiful. The younger girl went right over to Issei and took 2 pieces of his toast, sat down and began munching on them. Issei stared at her incredulously for a moment, then went back to his food. Until they had both finished, they sat in silence. Soon enough Issei broke it. So, how'd you sleep last night? Great. I just can't believe I'm part of the church again, but Issei, how are you involved with the church? I don't recognize you. The fact that she didn't know how or why Issei took her back into the church only now hitting her. Honestly, it caused an uneasy feeling to take root in her stomach. What if it was a lie? What if she wasn't really a part of the church again? You didn't lie to me, did you? Of course not, Asia. I have more say in what happens in the church than anybody. I'll show you soon, okay? Just trust me. What I will never do is lie to you. Issei smiled benevolently, something that couldn't just be faked by anyone. That action caused Asia to calm herself down. She knew even deeper down than the uneasiness that he was telling the truth. Okay, Issei, I'll trust you. But please, show me soon. Oh, and what part in the church am I to take? I will, Asia, and you'll find out when I show you. Let's go on that tour I promised you now. Issei stood up and offered her a hand. Excitement showing on all her features, Asia immediately took the hand. She really wanted to get to know the town. But Issei stopped her as he realized something. But first we need to fix you up a bit. Issei snapped his fingers, and Asia's bedraggled appearance became picture perfect once again. In addition, her nun clothing was replaced by a beautiful white dress. Issei smiled at his work and looked up to see Asia's amazed expression. Shock, surprise, joy and several other emotions displayed themselves plainly on Asia's face. How did you do that? Issei looked at Asia for a moment before realizing why she was so shocked. Even to the supernatural world, what he had just done was considered a miracle. But he shrugged it off. It's part of my position in the church. It comes with a few advantages. Offering her his arm, after snapping himself into a nice pair of dress pants and a button-up, Issei began out the door. This time Asia would actually get her tour. The tour had quickly evolved into a date of sorts. In addition to showing Asia her way around town, they went shopping, played at the arcade, went to the movies and eventually got lunch. Now they had made their way to the park, and Issei had a bad feeling, but dismissed it as feelings provoked by the events that had taken place here in the past. It was in the late afternoon, the sun shone high in the sky with hardly any clouds to block it from view, and the temperature was mild. A beautiful day to visit the park with the family, yet very few even seemed like they wanted to get close. It was an odd occurrence, but no reason to worry, and Issei was not in the mood to let suspicion take over. Slowly Issei led Asia towards a special spot he had found. It was a wooden bench just inside the tree line of a pathway. It provided a bit of privacy, was very comfortable and was surrounded by beautiful scenery. The perfect place for Issei to end the tour/date. As they sat, a comfortable silence enveloped them and they sat in it for several hours, simply enjoying each other company. Soon enough though, Issei ended the silence. It was getting late. So, how was your day, Asia? Did you have a good time? He knew she had been praising God for every little thing that happened all day long, and it was all genuine. Being God meant he knew exactly what she felt and it bothered him slightly. It felt like an invasion of her privacy. But Sanctus reassured him that it was completely alright and that sometimes being God and doing the right thing meant an invasion of privacy or a bit of violence. Unaware of the thoughts raging inside Issei, Asia continued the conversation. It was great. I had a lot of fun today, Issei. The smile graced his lips and he patted her head softly. That's good, Asia, maybe we'll go again sometime. Really, can we? An overly excited expression took root on her face. Yes, we can. Now let's head home. It's starting to get. Just as he was about to finish his sentence, his earlier suspicions were proven as a spear of corrupt light pierced his abdomen. He began to cough up blood. It didn't cause him very much pain, but it still damaged his body. As soon as she saw the spear, Asia attempted to remove it and heal the wound. Issei. Turning his head to see his attacker, he saw the same fallen that had attempted to kill him. Raynor stood about 5 foot behind him, sneering at him. Deep in her eyes there was a sliver of doubt, but covering it was surprise at seeing him alive and anger at him. Surprised to see me, Raynor? His voice was hoarse and he coughed up blood, but it still got the message across. She responded by sneering some more and speaking to Asia. If you come with me I'll spare your little friend girlie. So how about it, are you coming? Of course there was only one answer to Asia, and it was yes. She could never let Issei die for her, not after he had already done for her. So she walked over to the fallen. Yes, I'm coming. Then she turned and spoke to Issei for what she thought was the last time. Thanks for everything, Issei, you gave me everything I could have asked for, if only for a day. I owe you everything, Issei, goodbye. Immediately after, Raynor grabbed hold of Asia and disappeared in a flurry of black feathers. At the exact same time Issei had yanked out the spear and crushed it, his anger skyrocketing. He would hunt Raynor down if it was the last thing he did. Issei stood before the abandoned church located in Kuo. Beside him stood Rias and Akeno, the two people he trusted most out of all the supernatural beings at Kuo. Rias because they hung out all the time and were closer than people would think from two that had only met a few days ago. Akeno because she was usually around when Rias was, and despite the lack of a strong connection between them like he had with Rias, Issei had immediately taken a liking to the girl. He had spent the past 4 hours tracking Raynor to this church, then going back and telling Rias about it. She of course wanted to come along, with her entire peerage. Issei put a stop to that immediately, he was going to do this by himself. He only wanted Rias there to back him up in case something happened. But she wanted Akeno there at the very least, and she wasn't budging. So he let her tag along, he wasn't in the mood for arguing. It had taken him quite a while to track Raynor, she was excellent at running away, and he was still learning to follow residual energy signatures. In those hours anything could have happened to Asia, and he wasn't about to let anything else start. So he was anxious to say the least. But even as he stood there in anxiety, he marveled at the fact that neither of the devils seemed to even notice the concentrated holy energy seeping out of himself. Despite the overwhelming power, it was completely ignored. Sanctus and Drake had told him that taking command of God's system would give him control over such things, but he hadn't imagined it would be to so large a degree. He was snapped out of his thought when Rias spoke to him. Alright, Issei, you said you wanted to go in alone, right? But now that we're here I don't think it's a good idea. I can send some very powerful people in there, and there are lots of them, you don't have enough experience to take them all on. Frowning slightly, Issei spoke calmly, but it was laced with power from deep within. I might not be very experienced, Rias, but what I lack there I more than make up for in raw power. I'm going in alone, and that's final. Sighing, Rias relented. She hadn't realized his power until now, and as she heard his voice a shiver ran down her spine. Okay, Issei, just be careful. We can't have you getting hurt again after all. Issei nodded, remembering the spear wound from earlier. Though it had healed extremely quickly after removal of the spear, he didn't want to do it again. Okay then, I'm going in. You wait for me here, I'll call if I need anything. Nodding, both Rias and Akeno walked over to a nearby tree and leaned against. They watched solemnly as Issei walked into the abandoned church. As Issei approached the doors, he felt the power of 4 fallen and several stray priests. But only one was actually in the ground floor, the rest were all underground. Kicking in the doors, he looked up at the source of the first signal. It was a young man with silvery white hair and crazy eyes sitting in the rafters. The man jumped from the ceiling, landing with a small thud. He grinned insanely at Issei, not in the least bit worried about him. He couldn't sense Issei's power at all. Oh. I was hoping for something stronger than you. Ooh. I can't even feel anything coming from you. You're not even as strong as those shitty devil coons. This isn't going to be fun at all. Looking at the crazy priest blankly, Issei decided not to waste his time. With a bit of concentration, he formed a gold and white pair of gauntlets and boots around his limbs. Lunging forward before the priest could utter another word, Issei struck him squarely in the chin, knocking him out cold. Rising from his stance, Issei looked to the altar. He could sense a stairwell behind and willed it to move aside. As it slid over, a set of stairs was revealed. Immediately he jumped down them, landing in front of a door. On the other side he could hear anguished screams so loud he was surprised he hadn't heard them before. He could also hear Asia praying to God for forgiveness and salvation, but also to see him one more time. It broke his heart. Then rage consumed him, and he tore through the sealed doorway and into the next chamber. Inside were countless priests standing behind four fallen. In front of them was a silver cross with Asia strapped to the front. Sickly green lines of magic covered the cross, seeming to drain something from Asia. He immediately knew what it was and that he was already too late. Asia's time as a human was over. But he would let that time end in such a way. Without bothering to announce himself, Issei began pummeling the priest silently. Soon enough they were all unconscious, and the fallen had no idea he was there. Looking at the four fallen, he quickly measured their worth. Rainer, of course, was easy. She was the strongest and certainly the least holy. The lone male was also quite simple. He was the second strongest and seemed to be enjoying each and every moment of Asia's suffering. But the other two women were different. They were of equal strength, and both seemed to hate every moment that Asia suffered. They had looks of doubt, worry, sympathy, and even flashes of rebellion on their faces. They didn't want to have any part in this, but they also couldn't disobey the stronger two. If he could, he would spare them. Ending his analysis, Issei jumped at the lone male and landed on his back. Grabbing hold of his wings, he tore them out, catching the other's attention. He quickly thrust his fist into the male's skull and retracted it. He jumped next onto the still stunned Rainer. She put up more of a fight though. Just as he landed, he was pushed back and a light spear was launched at him, one which he crushed with his left hand. Going back onto the offensive, Issei didn't even give her time to blink, let alone speak. He brought his armor-clad hand up and punched her in the throat, crushing her windpipe. He knocked her aside and unconscious. He moved past the other two fallen who had taken up defensive positions and up to the cross. Quickly removing Asia, he spoke to the other two fallen. "You two are free to go. I know you didn't want any of this to happen. Leave here before the devils find you. I might be friends with them, but I can't change their opinions of you so quickly." Without even a word, the two left, to where no one could know. As soon as they had left the chamber, Issei carried Asia up into the sanctuary bridal style. Once he was there, he sat her down on a pew and gently woke her. Issei. Is that you?" Smiling down at her, Issei replied. Yes, it is Asia. How are you feeling?" Grimacing slightly at the pain she was once again feeling, Asia spoke her answer. "It hurts everywhere, but I'll be fine as long as you're here with me." Widening his eyes slightly at the statement, Issei began to give her an option besides imminent death. "Asia, you aren't going to make it much longer. That ritual tore your soul open, and it will kill you if I don't do something. So I have an offer for you. I can resurrect you as an angel before you die, if you so wish. But I can't heal you any other way, so it's up to you." Shedding a few tears in both joy and pain, Asia nodded. But she was not without one question. "Issei, are you God?" His only answer was an elated smile and a hand placed on her chest. As his hand made contact with her chest, her clothing burned away in that place, allowing skin-to-skin contact. A magnificent circle of pure white holy energy sprouted from his hand onto the ground. It spread all the way around the church property. An aura of godly proportions erupted from Issei and spread throughout the town. Asia Argento, as a firm and true believer in the biblical God, I, Syrinx, do hereby resurrect you into my family as a child of the light. Live purely and for God's sake. As Issei started the chant, the church grounds began to mend themselves, and everything went back to its proper place. It was no longer desecrated ground, but instead a holy sanctuary. Unknown to Issei, both Riaz and Akeno had entered the room just as he had begun the chant and witnessed everything after. As he finished the chant, Asia rose into the air, and white and golden robes replaced her dress. A golden halo formed around her head, and 6 golden wings sprouted from her back. She was not only an angel, but an archangel. Her faith was strong enough to give her 6 wings golden, and with practice she would gain another 6. Snapping her eyes open, Asia looked at Issei. A look of absolute adoration appearing and growing by the second. "I knew you'd save me, my lord." "Of course I did. What kind of god would I be if I didn't? Anyway, don't start calling me my lord or sire like Michael did. I'm just Issei Hyoudou, unless we're in a formal setting or at different factions' territory." As he said this, he enveloped her in a gentle hug, providing her with a bit of support. That was also when he spotted the girls watching. He looked at them questioningly. They only looked at him curiously. "Come on, Asia, there are 2 people I want you to meet." With that, he grabbed her hand and guided her over to Riaz and Akeno. "Asia, this are Riaz Gremory, heiress of the Gremory and high-class devil. And this is her queen, Akeno Himejima. Riaz, Akeno, this is Asia Argento, newly reincarnated archangel. And I suppose I need to reintroduce myself. I am Issei Hyoudou, the god of the Bible." Silence held firm in the newly revived church sanctuary. It was a deafening silence that had taken root upon the revelation of Issei's identity, and none of the room's occupants seemed willing to it. Issei was patiently waiting for a reaction. Asia was following Issei's lead, and Riaz and Akeno had yet to react at all. Only a few moments had passed since the revelation, and it was a big pill to swallow, so their lack of reaction was understandable. Soon enough though it came to an end as both Riaz and Akeno finally realized what they had been told. What was their communal response? Issei smiled gently and began again. I said that I am God from the Bible. He tried to continue but was cut off by Riaz. But you can't be God. We've practically been living together for the past week, I think I would have noticed. Anger and anguish clear on her beautiful features. Issei lost his smile immediately after seeing Riaz's expression. I assure you, I really am God. But that fact doesn't change anything, Riaz. I'm still the Issei that you've gotten to know over the past week. Riaz had fallen to her knees, and tears were making their way down her face, Issei's words having little effect on her. It was obvious she had grown quite attached to Issei in their short time together. Why, Issei? Why didn't you tell me? Because Riaz, I wanted you to get to know the real me before something like this happened. I've known you for the same amount of time as I've known what I am. I just didn't know how to tell you, so I put it off, even after I knew I could trust you. It never mattered to me what you were, race has no impact on our relationship. At that last comment he snuck a glance at Akeno, one she caught before it could be redirected. Riaz looked up from where she knelt after taking a moment to dry her eyes. Really? She muttered it weakly. Issei knelt down in front of Riaz and placed his hands on either side of her face, forcing her to make eye contact with him. Really? He spoke quietly before kissing her on the cheek. After withdrawing, Issei lifted the now slightly settled Riaz to her feet. Looking to Akeno, he nodded to her. Her reaction had been more shocked and slightly nervous, rather than Ria's pain-filled tears. Are you going to be okay? Yes, I think I'll be fine. I assume you're taking Lady Riaz home? She spoke quietly and with a hint of respect. Yes, I will be. We need to speak, but now is not the time. I'll find you after school tomorrow, okay? It was phrased as a question, but brooked no opposition from the girl. I'll see you tomorrow then. Asia, you should know how to teleport, it's instinctual to all God-made angels. Go home and get some rest, I'll meet you in the morning. He waited for confirmation from Asia, which was quickly given in the form of a quick nod, before disappearing with Riaz in a flash of white light. Staring at each other in silence for a moment, the sanctuary's remaining occupants thought about what had just transpired. Akeno was more stunned than anything, she had no deep connection to Issei, and didn't feel betrayed by his omission of the truth. If anything, she was awed by the fact she was standing in God's presence, as a fallen devil hybrid, and hadn't been killed on the spot. Asia on the other hand was ecstatic that she had met her God and become an angel, and though she didn't understand Ria's reaction fully, she felt bad that she was hurt by the discovery. Eventually their gazes broke apart and Asia spoke. I suppose I should get going then, it was nice to meet you. Akeno returned the gesture before summoning a magic circle and leaving the church, barely catching a glimpse of Asia doing the same, albeit in her own method of transportation. Issei appeared in Ria's room with a soft flash of light. In his arms was Riaz herself, who was in a rather disheveled state. It was plainly obvious that while Issei had calmed her down greatly, the night's events had still taken a great toll on her. Over the past week Issei had come to know Riaz fairly well, and as such he knew the reason behind her reactions to the truth. Riaz had been raised as the sole heir of House Gremory, one of the 72 pillars, and as the younger sister of Lucifer. While she had good relations with her family for the most part, everyone else saw her not as a person, but as the heir to Gremory and a connection to the Mau. So whenever she found a person that saw her as a person that she got along with well, she latched on. She found that person in Issei, but the attachment was tenfold for some inexplicable reason. In addition, she had been raised thinking anything holy to be an enemy, or at least unapproachable. So when she found Issei, someone she had latched onto tightly, to be God himself, it tore her apart at a core level. It was one of the main reasons Issei hadn't told her the truth sooner, he knew what would happen if not approached correctly. But it didn't matter now, what happened happened and nothing could change it. So he would move on and comfort Riaz, hopefully getting her pieced back together soon rather than later. Looking down at Ria's now still form, Issei silently noted she had fallen asleep in his embrace. Sighing, he maneuvered her onto the king-sized mattress and laid her down gently. Snapping his fingers softly, he magically removed all her clothing as he knew she liked when she slept. Positioning the covers over her nude form, he began to undress himself the traditional way. After accomplishing the task, he carefully crawled into the bed beside Riaz and allowed her to wrap herself around him. Not that he would ever have any complaints about being in bed with a naked woman, let alone a Riaz who was using him as a full-body pillow. Riaz woke in what was now an extremely familiar position. She was curled around Issei, having both her right appendages thrown over him, and her breasts were wrapped around his face. Despite what you would think, she wasn't in the slightest embarrassed or even unhappy about the situation. She had actually come to enjoy waking up and learning what odd position they would wake up to that morning. Unfortunately for her, that enjoyment was short-lived as the previous night's events came back to her and their full weight descended upon her. The man she had grown so very attached to, and maybe even had a crush on, was God, the very bane of her existence. But he obviously knew what she was yet hadn't taken a single action against her. Everything seemed to conflict in her mind for a moment before she felt a calming hand on her cheek. She looked up to see Issei awake. "It's alright, Riaz, everything's okay now. We're going to be fine." He gently whispered soothing words into her ear, all the while stroking her hair. For close to an hour this continued until finally Riaz found a bit of peace, even if only for a few moments. "I don't understand, Issei, if you're really God you shouldn't have anything to do with me. It goes against everything I know about the angels for their God to be so kind to a devil." She was extremely soft, almost inaudible, and Issei could feel the great tide of emotions being held back. "Riaz, one thing you have to understand is that being God doesn't mean hating the devils or things deemed unholy. I'm still not entirely sure, but I think it's actually the complete opposite." At that Riaz gained a dumbfounded expression, and Issei grinned at her. "Would you like to know a secret?" Sure, I guess." She replied, slightly unsure of herself. "Yesterday I said that I've known you for the same amount of time I've known I'm God. You probably forgot I did or dismissed it as a misunderstanding on your part, but it's the truth. You see, well, God is a person, it's also a title and position. Every time God dies a new one is chosen and is born with a God soul. I, the fourth God, am called Syrinx. This is of course one of the most heavily guarded secrets in existence, you are only the third person to know that truth." His smiling grew as he continued as a result of Ria's ever-brightening expression. "One question, why are Syrinx? It means herald, but of what?" Curiosity now filled her noticeably brighter features. "Well, each god has what we call a holy name. The first was Munderit, the second was Bellum, the third was Sanctus, and I am Syrinx. The name is given to use at the first awakening of our power and is based of our ideals, traits or outstanding characteristics. The first wanted only to purify the world and lived much before the time of humans, the second thrived off of battle and started the original Great War, and the third wanted to save everyone but grew to hate devils and fallen after being scorned by them repeatedly. I aim to bring about peace and prosperity using both my power as God and Drake's power." Who's Drake? More questions filled her mind in the seconds between each word. "Drake is the dragon sealed in my sacred gear, the boosted gear." A grin appeared on his face. Ria's face still managed to glow brighter, her mood having done a 180 in only a few moments. "Talk about irony, you're God yet you use a god-slaying weapon." Even as she said those words she began to understand their implication however, and she became awestruck. "But Issei, if you have God's power and the ability to double that power indefinitely, how strong are you?" Chuckling at her reaction, Issei elaborated. "Well, one would assume I'd be ranked at around the top 3 most powerful, probably bordering office in raw power. But the truth of the matter is that I'm only at about 1/5 my full strength, putting me at the level of an ultimate class devil, much like your brother in fact." Frowning in confusion, Riaz continued her line of questioning. "But why don't you have all your power, is it sealed or just incomplete?" Without missing a beat at the interruption, Issei continued on in his explanation. "You see, each portion of power is awarded to me when I gain sufficient control over the power I already have. There are 5 fragments of my power, each bigger than the last, and I only have the first. Unfortunately the final and most powerful fractal, containing the bulk of my power, is sealed beyond that. The gain that I have to meet incredibly difficult requirements." If Riaz was confused before, now she was completely lost. "But why is that? I understand the control limit, but why is the final piece sealed away until you can meet an impossible goal?" Because Bellum, the second god, was an idiot and a total battle freak. She was the strongest being in existence save the Dragon Kings, evil dragons, Office, Great Red, and the Trahexa. Since none of the dragons could be bothered to fight her and the Trahexa was in isolation, she was utterly bored. So to resolve her problem she negotiated with other religious faction to stop the church's major encroachment on their territory if they could seal off that final portion of power. It was a no-brainer for the other deities, their territory would remain stable and their fiercest rival would be reduced to a fraction of her former self. What Bellum didn't know until after the sealing was the condition to regaining her power. Issei sighed in slight depression as he recalled the actions of his past self. "I can assume things didn't end well for her." Riaz was completely consumed by Issei's story. "You'd be right if you did." For a while she enjoyed her new struggle against foes she would have once dominated, but soon she became overwhelmed. She was overconfident, while in the past she could stand above the rest, now she could barely stand equal to them. But she didn't realize this and went into a battle she had no hope of winning, a brawl with 3 of the evil dragons did her in. Brendel, Layden and Crom Cruach left her dying on the battlefield. She made it back to heaven just in time to tell Michael and use her remaining power to give the system life until her successor was born. At the memory of Belam's death he flinched slightly. But against 3 dragons of such power, even at her peak, she wouldn't have stood much a chance. Why would she have fought them? Even a peerless battle freak would go into a suicidal fight like that. It was unthinkable to Riaz. From what I understand, she didn't have much a choice. Despite her battle maniac tendencies, she still had people she loved, and the evil dragons wanted her dead for some unfathomable reason. So they used her family to goad her into a fight. Even though they weren't his memories, Issei still felt the ancient emotions attached to them. He understood what Belam did. Anyway, what are the requirements? She was done with talk of ancient history, how she wanted to know more about the present. Sighing, Issei recalled the mental list of requirements he had formed. First and foremost is peace between the 3 factions. Second, I believe, is complete control over the first 4 fragments. And third is a union with the devils. Riaz lifted an eyebrow at the last condition. It seemed slightly odd. Well, the control should come with time and experience, so no problem there. But the peace between the factions is an outlandish goal if I've even heard one. The 2 of yous might be fine, but I'm not sure about everyone else. Anyway, what kind of union are you talking about? Grinning sheepishly, Issei spoke his reply. Well, it's the marriage kind. Ria's eye just about popped out of her skull at those words, and she was more than tempted to giggle. That's almost laughable. Peace might be doable, but how could you get a marriage like that to work? Let alone who you could get to do it, they'd have to be high up and willing. Issei thought for a moment on both his decisions and his current course of action before making up his mind and looking pointedly at Riaz. His meaning was clearer than daylight to the youthful woman. Spotting the look and immediately understanding it, it was all Riaz could do to meekly utter one word. Us. All the reply Issei gave was a slight nod, his formerly calm demeanor now burning with nerves and repressed emotion. Riaz was stunned silent. On one hand, she had indeed grown to love Issei over their admittedly short time together, and she would be happy to stay with him and help him reclaim his power. But on the other hand, he was still God, she was engaged to Rizer, and her family wouldn't like it. There were so many things to consider, and it all rushed through her mind at once. The only result was a migraine. Luckily it was ended when Issei spoke again. Don't worry about answering that quite yet. I'd like to know you better first, and it wouldn't be for quite a while yet. Despite everything, we're only teenagers and we have our whole lives ahead of us. Let's not rush things. As he said those words, the pressure left both Issei and Riaz, only for it to return again as a silver magic circle sprouted from the carpet beside the bed they were currently laying on. From that circle rose a beautiful young woman, on Riaz knew to be Graphia Lucifuge. She had creamy skin, silver eyes and matching hair that fell to her lower back. On either side of her head were 2 long braids held together by blue bows, and she wore a light blue French-made outfit. Her only other accessory was red lipstick. Aura radiated off her form as she rose from the circle with closed eyes. As soon as she was completely present in the room, her eyes snapped open and scanned the area. When her eyes landed on Issei, they betrayed a flicker of hope before she quickly schooled her features. Lady Riaz, I was unaware you had company. Looking at Graphia slightly annoyed, Riaz addressed her. And I was unaware you would be making an appearance today, Graphia. As she spoke, she softly shook her head side to side, as if trying to secretly convey a message to her. Issei picked up on it, but decided he would remain silent. Apparently getting whatever message Riaz was attempting to get across, Graphia moved on. I only came to give you warning. Lord Rizer is growing impatient and will likely be visiting you in the next week. If that is all, I shall be taking my leave. She paused a moment for a reply and got none. Very well, take care, Lady Riaz. She left in the same fashion she had arrived in and was gone from the room. As Issei looked away from Graphia's former location, he noticed that Riaz had gained a somber appearance. Riaz, what's the matter? And who's this Rizer guy? He had already known about Graphia from talking with Riaz. Those words seemed to jolt Riaz. Rizer Phoenix, the 3rd son of Lord Phoenix and my fiancé. I'm sorry, Issei, I should have told you sooner. With each word she spoke she seemed more and more depressed. Riaz, you've done nothing wrong. It's obviously a sore subject for you. I for one don't like to push. What you tell me is up to you, but I can't help if I don't know what's happening. Each word was filled sincerity and they struck Riaz. They made her realize what she needed to do, and she did it. They spent the better part of an hour discussing her situation and how to resolve it. When they finished, Issei realized the time and went home to speak with Asia before getting to school. Asia had been waiting in Issei's room for quite a while now. She had slept there the night before and had been sitting on his bed wait after getting ready and eating fast that morning. But now there was less than an hour until school started and she was getting a little worried. The fear was completely unfounded, however, as Issei appeared in his room moments after it had started. Good morning, Asia, how did you sleep last night? Were the first words out his lips. Out of instinct she replied instantly. "Well, how about you?" "Fairly well," were the few words he could get out before Asia pounced. "Issei. How come you took so long?" Her complaints sound more like a child than that of a young adult. Sheepishly rubbing the back of his head, Issei replied. "Well, you see, I had to explain some things to Riaz and then something came up and I helped her out a little bit." Curiosity overtaking her, Asia released Issei and began her interrogation. "What did you explain? And what did she need help with?" So began Issei's repeat of his earlier discussion with Riaz. As they spoke, he began getting ready for school and was done by the time he ended his explanation. They still had over half an hour to get to school. They left the house then, planning to discuss how Issei helped Riaz on the way. "So what are you going to do about Rizer, Issei?" Riaz said that she planned to challenge Rizer in a rating game to annul the betrothal. "So because I can't directly interfere without causing incident, I'm going to help train her and her peerage. But as a failsafe I'll have Riaz sign an ancient contract stating that she has sworn herself to the service of the church. That way I'll be able to challenge Rizer for her. There's no way I'd lose against him." He knew it wasn't the best plan, but it was all he could do. "Okay, but what does the contract mean?" All Asia seemed to do was produce more questions for him to answer. Taking a moment to organize his thoughts, Issei gave his answer. "The contract is part of an ancient treaty between the angels and devils. Basically, any angel or devil that wish to switch allegiances need only to sign the contract. It only comes into effect if it is signed by both the individual and a faction leader. I won't sign it until I absolutely need to for Ria's sake, so unless she loses and the Mayu prove to be unreasonable I won't need it. That makes sense. So please, tell me about my resurrection." Her words tapered off, slightly unsure of the topic. Smiling at Asia's apparent nervousness, Issei reassured her and answered her inquiry. "It's alright to be a little nervous, Asia, it's not every day you're resurrected as an angel. Anyway, I brought you back from the dead using my power as God. It's part of my system in heaven, but it doesn't work in full capacity without me. Unfortunately I could only do so as an angel. It's okay, Issei, I'm glad to be an angel, and I'm especially happy to serve you." Her expression was one of pure joy and genuine excitement. "That's good to hear, Asia, as long as you're happy. But we're a bit off topic, for a multitude of reasons you were not only reborn as an angel, but an archangel with 6 wings. You have a significant level of power and hold a high station within the ranks of heaven. I have no doubt you will one day be a seraphim and Michael's equal, but don't tell him I said that. Now, as an angel of such high stature you have equal responsibilities." He paused for a moment letting his words sink in, but in that short time he was interrupted. "What are those responsibilities?" She was hungry for more information and didn't want to wait. Chuckling at her eagerness, Issei began again. "Your primary job will be as my personal aide. There are a few other things but they can wait, the academy is just around the corner and we have to get to class." Adding the last bit of slightly depressing news didn't stop Asia from grinning like a lunatic for the rest of the day. Who would have thought she'd be God's personal assistant? The school day was largely uneventful for Issei, save when Motohama and Mitsuda tried to force porn and lewd conversation on him during class and lunch. He of course shot them down. It's not that he didn't want to participate, just that he'd rather have a shot at getting into a girl's pants than talk about it and never get said chance. Saving face and rebuilding his reputation were much more important to the cause than talking about it in public. Other than that, however, there were no outstanding events. Now school was out and Issei intended to speak with Akeno as he had promised. As such he was standing in the occult research club room waiting for her to show up. Other than him the room was empty, Riaz having taken Kiba and Kaneko out so he could speak privately with Akeno. As he sat in wait, his mind began thinking up ways to aid Riaz and her peerage. Riaz herself was very powerful, but her control was lacking and she had little variety. She would benefit greatly from some meditation, a bit of magic control practice and a bit of creativity in applying her known magics. Akeno was strong, but was holding back for reasons unknown. What he did know was that she had control over holy energies and wasn't using it. If he could convince her to use her full power she would dominate the field. The same went for Kaneko, she was holding back her Nekomata abilities and relying on the rook strength alone. Ing her of that would increase her strength tenfold and she could fight using her senjutsu. But doing it wouldn't be easy, he had memories of her praying to God for relief before she was a devil, it would take work, but it was worth it. Then there was Kiba, he was different. He had no hidden ability or bloodline, and he had a fatal flaw, his main advantage was his speed, and against a faster opponent he stood no chance. But he had one ace in the hole that, if properly nurtured, could change the tide of any battle. His sword birth sacred gear had untold potential if he could study powerful swords closely to learn how to build them, and if he introduced a new source of power. That in speed training would make him a formidable foe. But considering his past it would be difficult to gain his trust after revealing his true identity. Last but not least was Gasper, who was currently sealed away. If Rias could convince her brother to allow his unsealing, Issei could help him gain control over his sacred gear, forbidden Baylor view. The gear had potential to become the 14th Longinus if properly trained. Meditation and focus training would do him great things. He was broken from his planning by the sound of a door opening and closing. Turning around from his position standing by the window, Issei spotted Akeno taking a seat on one of the two couches in the room. "Hello Akeno, how was your day?" "Fine, and yours Ara?" Her voice perfectly sweet and innocent, an act put up by the ultimate sadist that was Akeno. "Long, but not all that bad. Now, I assume you have questions for me?" As he replied and posed in question, he sat down in the opposite couch. Ara, so straightforward to say. She grinned her slightly sadistic smile before letting it drop to continue on, having gotten the desired response from Issei. That response being a slightly distressed look. "But yes, I do have several questions for you. But this is my most important one, what are your intentions toward Rias?" Getting serious to answer a serious question, Issei quickly replied. "Rias is my best friend and someone I care for deeply. I have no plans for Rias, anything we do is a joint decision. But no matter what I won't hurt her, ever." Smiling genuinely, Akeno relaxed at the assurance. "Then please, tell me about the situation." She had no idea the pain those words caused Issei. But despite that pain, Issei launched into an abridged version of the discussion he had with Rias and Asia. It took about an hour and a half to complete with small additions here and there as Akeno asked questions. But they eventually got past the bulk of explanation, newer questions began to appear. "So if you're God, can you make fallen angels rise again?" "Yes I can. I can purify all fallen, but fallen devil hybrids such as yourself can't be completely cleansed. It's because of your devil element that prevents it. But you would still rise to be what I call a dark angel, they're angels only they embody the less pure elements of life. You'd be the first to exist since Bellum died, that's several millennia." He knew what she was getting at, he didn't know why, but she despised fallen. Being a partial fallen was obviously torture for her, and she wanted to end that. If God was the way to accomplish it then so be it. What he didn't count on was the small explosion mentioning her race would being on. "How did you know that?" "Definitely a sore subject, one to be handled carefully. Akeno, what you have to understand is that when I inherited my position, I heard all the prayers that had been uttered during God's absence, including yours. I know that you had being what you are, I do T1Y, but you do. What'll tell you is that race has no effect on what I or anyone worth your time will think about you." Sighing slightly in mixed relief and apprehension, Akeno prepared herself for what she was about to do. "Issei, do you mind if I show you something?" "Anything Akeno." Aside from being a good friend and helping her through this, it was the first stage in helping Rias win her rating game. Wordlessly she unfurled her fallen angel wings, glistening feathers blacker than the night sky appearing around her. Nervously she looked at Issei. "What do you think?" "They're beautiful, you might not see it, but they are gorgeous." Those words were spoken with a complete and total honesty that not even the most accomplished liars could replicate. As he said them, he reached out slowly with one hand to stroke the feathers gently. Issei, so sudden. "I'm not sure we're at that point yet." Akeno had gotten over the first hurdle in her struggle, but there was certainly more to come in the future. Rather than give in, Issei played along with Akeno's innuendo. "Whatever you say Akeno, just let me know when we are." Giggling slightly at Issei's playfulness, Akeno changed the subject. Retracting her wings at the same time. "So how are you handling the transition?" Smiling at Akeno's concern, Issei realized she was the first person to ask him that. "I'm doing alright, thanks for asking Akeno." You're welcome Issei. "I'm glad you're doing well though, I can't imagine the situation was easy to adjust to." Concern shining through her features. "You'd be surprised actually, it was fairly simple. All I really had to do was resync my system in heaven and claim my throne. There weren't very many responsibilities for God, most things are handled by the angels or the church, and the rest are maintained by the system. Only the big things ever make it to me, and the rest is my own personal choice." A content look appeared on his face. I guess you're actually happy with your position then. But I should get going Issei, it's already fairly late." She was starting to get tired and was yawning every so often. Issei looked over at the clock and saw that it was indeed getting late, in fact it was just about sundown. "You're right, we should probably go home. I would want to worry anyone by being out too late. Goodbye Akeno." He stood up and began toward the door as he spoke. "I agree, Ara. Goodbye, I'll see you tomorrow." And Issei thanks. She had also gotten off the couch and had walked to the door, but rather than open it, she hugged Issei while thanking him, then seductively swayed her hips all the way down the hall. The next day passed by in a much similar fashion as the last. Issei woke up with Asia wrapped around him, they got ready, they went to school, attended class, ate lunch, got pestered by the perverted duo, back to class, and then it was finally over. Issei and Asia were just getting ready to knock on the OCR room's door when they felt two beings appear on the other side. One had a large concentration of power but not overwhelming. What was odd about him was the presence of a corrupt phoenix in his aura. The other was a crushing aura that smelt of demonic eyes. It belonged to one Graphia Lucifuge. It appeared as though her warning to Riaz had been correct. Quietly telling Asia to stay behind him just in case, Issei opened the door widely, attracting the entire room's attention. Scanning the room quickly, Issei noticed several things. One was how tense Ria's peerage seemed, even Akeno who knew the solution was already in play. Second was how Ria's face immediately brightened as they made eye contact. Third was how Graphia seemed to try to mediate the situation and was only half succeeding. And fourth was Riser's hand attempting to grope Ria's. The last one set him off. A blast of holy energy so concentrated it couldn't be recognized as holy hit Riser right between the eyes, blowing his head into tiny bits of flame scattered around the room. The same second it happened every eye in the room that didn't belong to one who knew who Issei was widened at the show of power. Unsurprisingly it was Riaz who first spoke. Issei. I'm so glad you're here, I need a bit of help please. Glad to see you to Riaz, what can I do for you? It should take the flaming turkey over there about 20 minutes to grow his head back, so we've got time. He smiled at Riaz, loving the way she giggled at his name for Riser. I want you to help me convince Graphia we can handle training Gasper. She whispered it into his ear so only he could hear her voice. We've already agreed to an unofficial rating game and we have 1 week to prepare for it. I'd like to use that time wisely, so if Graphia deems you worthy you are going to help train us. Sounds easy enough, but what exactly do you want me to do? I'm not good at lying through my teeth. And he honestly wasn't, he could hardly look your direction when he was lying without a plan of action. I've got it, tell her you've studied sacred gears and how to control them all your life. Then give her a small demonstration with Kiba's sword birth and release a bit of your aura. That should do the trick. Winking at Issei in confidence, she backed off and allowed him to do his thing. Graphia took the initiative. Who are you exactly and why are you here? Only devils should even know about this place. Looking Graphia in the eyes, he answered shortly and to the point. My name is Issei Hyoudou. I've studied sacred gears all my life and I'm an expert in activating, controlling and bringing gears to their full potential and beyond. As he spoke he released a third of his aura, which was still a substantial amount. The power brought a chill to all the devil's spines. Issei then calmly stepped over to Kiba, where he asked permission to use him as an example. At first he was unsure, but seeing how greatly Riaz trusted him convinced him to allow it. Alright Kiba, your sacred gear, Sword Birth, is a gear that produces swords of any types using only on your imagination and the power source you use to activate it, correct? Yeah, that's right. Before I was a devil I could make regular and even weak holy swords. His voice was calm and even, but there was an underlying strain that Issei could pick up on around the word holy. So the strength and abilities of your sword rely on the amount of power used and your mental depiction of the sword. Let's see your strongest sword right now. Issei had transitioned to full-on teacher mode now. Holy Eraser. Kinda shouted the name of his blade as he crafted it in his hands. Taking the blade from Kiba, Issei studied it for a moment before flicking it with a holy infused finger. The blade shattered instantly. While everyone around him stood awestruck, Issei thought out where he would go next. Deciding his course of action quickly, he drew in a deep breath then continued. Okay, so that was your strongest blade, let's make a better one. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you an immensely powerful blade to study. I want you to look past the metal and look instead at the runic patterns and energy channels in the blade. Then you will try to recreate it, but instead of using your power as a source we're going to use mine. Now I have a few swords for you to choose from. First is Durandal, second is Ascalon, and third is Elucidator. All three are incredibly powerful, but each has its own specialization. Durandal is destruction, Ascalon is dragon slaying, and Elucidator is an anti-monster blade. Please, take your pick. With those final words he opened 3 magic circles, and the prescribed swords rose out of them. Once again the room stared in shock and awe at the blades. How he could have these swords none of them knew, it was unthinkable. But sooner rather than later Kiba looked at each blade determinedly and reached out to grab one. In the end he went for Elucidator. Grasping the blade he felt the tingle of power it sent up his arms. At first he looked at the sword itself, but then he followed Issei's instruction and looked at the mystic intricacies of the blade. For a few moments he continued, then he relinquished the sword and nodded to Issei. Alright Kiba, you're going to feel a light tapping sensation wherever your gear is centered. That's my power, I want you to draw on it to create this blade. In 3, 2, 1, go. The signal was given and Kiba began to recreate the blade he had studied. It took slightly longer than his other swords, but the result was obviously much more desirable. By the time he finished he had an almost exact replica of the sword in his hands. It had the same appearance, the same aura and even the same magical capability. The only difference was a decrease in power, it was about half as strong as the original. But that was still incredibly powerful. Once again taking the blade from Kiba, he gave it a few test swings before punching the blade full on with a bare fist. But this time there was hardly a scratch. Rafia watched amazed as this boy taught Ria's knight how to properly use his gear to replicate legendary swords. It was an amazing feat, one only a master could have been able to accomplish. But now she had to bite the bullet, she had promised Riaz that he could train them if he was worth, and he was beyond worthy. In the course of 15 minutes he had practically recreated one of the most powerful swords in existence, using only his raw power and a novice skill. It was honestly a miracle. Very well Riaz, he has more than proven himself to me. I could think of no one better suited to train Gasper than him. You may unseal your bishop at any time you wish. As for the raiding game, you have 1 week to train starting tomorrow. I wish you luck. Oh, and please, send Lord Riser back when he wakes. Without another word she disappeared in a silver circle of magic. At the same time as that short exchange took place, the rest of the room's occupants save Asia and Akeno were looking to Issei in awe. How was he this powerful and they didn't even notice it? But at the same time they realized they couldn't feel his aura any longer, was he repressing it? They couldn't be sure, but time would tell. Currently Riaz was hugging the life out of Issei. With his help she had a chance to win the game with Riser. She didn't want Issei to have to fight for her sake, it wasn't his problem and certainly not his battle to fight. So she would do everything in her power to prevent that from happening. By the time she released Issei he was gasping for air, having been unable to breathe in Ria's grasp. I know you're happy Riaz, but there's no reason to suffocate me. The group chuckled slightly at the attempted humor. It was at this point that Riser finally reawakened, slightly disoriented. Who dares attack Lord Riser? Some filthy human, you aren't even worthy of touching my boots. He had obviously forgotten the pain he must have felt moments ago. Issei was just about to tell the fried chicken to piss off when he was beaten to it by Riaz. Get out of here Riser, I'll see you at the raiding game. Fine then Riaz, but when you lose remember it's your own fault. In a flurry of golden flames he vanished from the human world. And good riddance. Were Issei's final words to the man. It had the whole room cracking up with laughter. End of the here. So that's it for today's video guys, before you go just like the video and share it with your friends.